Time to get super excited with Casey Lau.
Today, my guest is Michael Lau, the SVP of Head of Global Sales at Bullish.com. We're filming here live in Hong Kong. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Casey. Happy to be here.
So let's start off, I guess, Michael Lau, no relation to me, but what is you used to work in investment banking, and then you moved into crypto over the last couple of years. Talk a little bit about your journey, like where are you from, how'd you get to Hong Kong, and how'd you get into crypto?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, born and raised there, went to university there. And when I was in university, I studied engineering, and I found myself actually doing internships here in Hong Kong because there's some kind of family connection here. And it's funny because I actually thought that, as an engineer, my dutiful thing would be to go work at a factory. So I did, and I ended up in a factory where, effectively, they melted metal, and I'm Canadian.
Okay.
Moved to Hong Kong, it's hot, and then you move to a factory where it melts metal, it's super hot. And I only realized at that point in time that there were two things in my career that I wanted. And one was to wear nice clothes to work, and the second was an air-conditioned office to wear them.
And the coldest office is a banking office.
Correct, exactly. So somehow I ended up in banking. I was there for about a decade and a bit. And along the way, I guess there's always been like a little inner nerd of mine that wanted to understand how technology could be used to disrupt business models, to think about ways to do things differently. And I ended up finding myself just fascinated by emerging technology. In particular, I was really interested in AI for a little while. And then as I started kind of getting to know more of what was going on, actually two former colleagues of mine ended up joining a blockchain company and said, hey, we're building a crypto exchange, which would now be Bullish. And at the time they said, hey, we got some coders, some developers. One day we're going to have customers. You want to be the customer guy? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll be the customer guy. And so that was beginning of 2020. And I thought, hey, if I had a chance to redo my career, I would have loved to do something in like the internet, doing something that's kind of more technology forward. And I thought to myself, hey, this has got all the signs of something that could be big. And I thought, hey, this would be a great chance to try something different. So that's how I ended up in the space.
Right. You have a marketing background, but now you're in sales for Bullish.com. Can you tell us what is Bullish.com actually?
Yeah. So Bullish is a crypto exchange. We're focused on institutions. The idea was quite simple. Like 3 years ago when we first started this thing, there were two big themes that we thought were going to be emerging through this. One was that there'd be more regulation in the space, and the second was that there'd be more institutions coming through. And so we thought, well, how do we build something that would address the incoming environment, but also help customers that are coming through of that size and of that scale? And so the idea was to try to find something that, fit that from the perspective of, being regulated, being properly audited and all that kind of stuff, but also technologically differentiate how we actually provide, let's say, liquidity into the market. And so that's what we did, was said, build a centralized exchange that brings together this technology of traditional exchanges and also automated market makers, which is something very much in DeFi. And that's where Bullish is today. We're here servicing institutions. And as of last week on this platform called Coinmetrics, we were actually the 6th largest exchange by volume of all the spot exchanges in the world, which is pretty cool after only just a year and a half.
Okay, so there's a few other exchanges here in Hong Kong like OKX, Huobi, Crypto.com, and FTX started here in Hong Kong. How is Bullish different from those exchanges?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing is that we've always wanted to serve institutional customers as kind of the focus of what we do, which I think differentiates us from a lot of these other exchanges where there's been a lot more retail focus. But the second is also, day one being regulated, because again, we kind of feel like that was important for this next inning of the industry where things are starting to evolve more and more and you're getting more clarity around this type of thing. So that's kind of where we really differentiate ourselves in terms of, I guess, the form, but also the technology. That's where this whole use of an automated market maker is quite different. And so, we kind of superficially are similar in that we're centralized, we do spot exchange, but when you go down deeper, there's actually quite a bit of differentiation between us and the rest of the other groups that are here as well.
Amazing. And the headquarters for Bullish is here in Hong Kong, but you have offices in Singapore, around Asia, and also in the US, or there are some people in the US.
Yeah, so the Hong Kong is our largest presence. We've got a pretty big group over here, and I think part of it is because a lot of the people that were part of the original team that built Bullish started here in Hong Kong, and there's just something about Hong Kong in terms of the talent that you have here, the energy that you have that we just felt it made sense for us to continue developing here. And, as difficult as it has been, in the last couple of years, in particular, with all the COVID restrictions and regulatory uncertainty, we've always felt there was something special about kind of the momentum here in Hong Kong. So we stuck it out, and this is still where
So it looks like you made the right bet, because it seems like the Hong Kong government is getting their act together. And June 1st of this year, which is very soon, there's going to be a whole change in the regulations here. So you said you're already regulated, but not by Hong Kong government, but you are now going to be regulated by Hong Kong government. Talk a little bit about how that whole regulation thing plays in with what you guys are doing in selling cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. So we're regulated by this group called the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission. Back in 2020, there were actually very few regulators at the time around the world that actually had both a very comprehensive method and framework for that. And the second was actually having a history of handing out these licenses. And so we chose Gibraltar as kind of our first starting point, because it was a place where we could get this done so that we're ready for day one, right? But as we've been monitoring and looking at all the different things, we're always trying to understand where the landscape's moving and staying ahead of that, right? So we think that, for example, a lot of what we do as an exchange in terms of KYC and AML and all those kind of hygiene factors means that there's a small gap in terms of us and fitting in with regulations that we think are relevant. So we've been watching very closely what's happened here because, there's just been a greater amount of clarity coming through and from the SFC, which is exciting because they are also a very well-known regulator. I come from traditional markets, and that's kind of a space where we feel this is what would be needed for a lot more of that institutional adoption, and I think for us, the idea is that, coming June 1st, there's going to be this new regime that is being rolled out and kind of call it the grandfathering period leading up to when they actually start utilizing or enforcing that kind of new regime. And this is exciting because this is kind of when you have companies who've been part of the program are now going to be able to, provide services here under that new framework in an exempt kind of fashion. Again, we're still waiting for it. This is my understanding of what's coming through. But it's exciting because, again, I think the support from, regulators, the support from the broader ecosystem here in Hong Kong, that's the kind of stuff that we need to encourage this adoption and to be encouraged in the right way, right?
Right. Okay. So here's the big question. Why is Hong Kong doing this? Right. Yeah. Before, a couple of years ago, it seemed like it was pretty open. Then something happened. So a lot of people left. They went to Singapore. They went to Dubai. Now Hong Kong is coming out of this second tier advantage now, right? They're coming out and saying, we're going to regulate it here, come back and build here. Why do you think now, 2023, is the time for them to do this?
Yeah, so I think just from what I've kind of observed and heard is that, Hong Kong's been watching this whole thing unfold. I think if you look at the history of, let's say, exchanges or other kind of blockchain or crypto-related stuff, there's actually a lot of history here in Hong Kong. Like a lot of companies started out here or had meaningful presence here at some point in the history. And I think in the last 2-3 years, it's been a little difficult just given the uncertainty as it relates to what was announced, across the border in China, as well as the fact that COVID just meant that it was harder to be able to operate here in Hong Kong, right? And so I think, as digital as a Web3 or a crypto company you'd imagine we want to be, there's still something about, being together as a team, building businesses, that makes a big difference. And COVID made it quite difficult, right? And so as we're starting to see, I guess, kind of a lot of these things start to open up again, I think it just times well with, I guess, where other places have accelerated in the past and may be de-accelerating. Hong Kong, I think, is seeing this opportunity to say, well, you know what? Actually, we've got a fantastic infrastructure ecosystem that we've got here. We can really cultivate this stuff. And now that we've, I guess, kind of moved on from the era that we've just had in terms of COVID restrictions, uncertainty, here's a chance to take the lead, and I think for our space in particular, it's quite interesting because Hong Kong's always been a tier 1 capital market in the world.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a cool convergence of both that finance and technology that's found here in Hong Kong. That's quite unique to the world. And I think that's why this is a particularly interesting point.
Okay. But I guess I see it more as Hong Kong has been under kind of stress, I guess is a light way of saying it, since 2019. I kind of see it as a gift from Beijing. That's how I see this. Hong Kong getting this kind of open hand like gift to be able to do this, because as we all know, and then to clarify, none of this is happening in China. There are no exchanges selling cryptocurrency at all, and it's not allowed. It's illegal. No mining, nothing. Right? Stay away from the international known currencies. They're going to make their own. They're going to monitor their own. But Hong Kong, kind of being a Switzerland is still allowed to do this, right? This is kind of interesting. Do you agree with that or no?
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. And I think that, Hong Kong plays quite an important role in terms of, how we think about both, I guess, capital as well as technology in this space, right? Because there is still that sense, and I still hear this from a lot of friends, that Hong Kong is kind of like this, East meets West gateway point in the space. And I think this is pretty cool because if you think about, the amount of influence that Hong Kong has, right? Like just think about like the global, call it voice that Hong Kong has in the news versus the size of the population. And in particular, when you compare it to many of the tier 1 cities in China, you're talking about double-digit million population.
Right.
Here, it's only like 7-8 million people, right?
Right.
But that outsized voice is a particularly interesting dynamic, I find, because to a certain degree, whatever we can work out over here, it does get amplified, and I think that's a particularly interesting point to play as well, given the fact that there has always in the last decade been a leadership kind of technology leadership, particularly from China.
Yeah.
And I think that, as you're starting to see, Hong Kong as this area where it's been designated to properly, under the right rules, under the right framework, continue to grow and foster innovation.
Yeah.
I do think that amplification does happen.
Yeah, right. Now, I'm going to ask you a little something on that because I think it's interesting. So, Macau is this kind of like Las Vegas, right? It's a casino, it's a gambling hub, billions of dollars going in and out of that city every year, right? Do you think that having this crypto, regulation, okay, there's going to be tight regulation on it, but there's allowing this to happen, we'll see a lot of outflow of capital from China to the international markets through crypto?
I don't know. Like that's something that's quite difficult to try to discuss and also debate, because at the same time there's also so much capital that already flows through here anyways, right? I think there's a significant amount of this convergence between what was this, call it like nascent industry called crypto. And I remember 3 years ago, I would go to my office and be like, guys, you won't believe it, but CNBC said Bitcoin for the 3rd time this month. We're going mainstream, to now where it is actually mainstream.
Right.
And I think the convergence actually happens more from the fact that international money flows through Hong Kong.
Okay.
There's significant amounts of it that go through here. And there's a much tighter correlation between crypto, blockchain technology entering into the mainstream finance world that meets Hong Kong, right? So again, I don't know exactly what's going to happen on that dynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the rules of the road that, the SFC and others put in place. But at the same time, there is so much already happening here. That's what I'm so excited about.
All right, that makes sense. Okay, so let's kind of break it down for like an international audience.
Sure.
What is actually going to happen on June 1st here in Hong Kong? Is there like a magic key turn on and everyone's going to start trading crypto, Bitcoins and Ethereum, or what?
So what's been happening is the SOC has been basically kind of communicating and engaging with the community here about kind of what this new regime would look like. And the idea here is that before June 1st, there'll be kind of clear rules of the road that will be displayed, and we're all kind of eagerly anticipating what that's going to look like. But that June 1st is kind of the period of which there is a 1 year lead up to the actual rollout of that particular rule set. And that 1 year is also the kind of area where you could, for example, be part of a, call it grandfathering process or an exempt period. And that's when you start to see a lot of these, call it proper operations starting to form. And I think what's exciting about it is it's that ramp up, it's that next phase. And I think in particularly for people who are here in Hong Kong, both companies and individuals, once the rules have been set out, what you're hopefully going to get is, top grade service, top grade companies, top grade, offerings that hopefully match what the consumers want and what, businesses need. And that's kind of what we're excited to see is kind of, to a certain degree, it's not like a key that kind of opens up the doors all of a sudden, but it's that kind of, fuel to the fire. Hopefully it amplifies it up. So then that way we're seeing that next stage as we lead through. And hopefully at that time, what it means is people who build really great products are the ones who win it. Yeah. And that's better for the consumer. And if it follows the rules, and that's great for that adoption story.
But when they start able to sell crypto to normal people here in Hong Kong, do you think that people are waiting for this here to buy it, the local people? Or do you think because I know they're already selling it in those ETFs, so you can buy into it, right? And just start, gauging it. It's also a bear market, so it's not super exciting and not super volatile. What do you think about that? Like, what's the appetite here in Asia for getting into this for non-crypto people?
Yeah. So I'd say that there's a couple of things to it. One is, as an asset class, it's staying, right? There's something about what we're doing in terms of like building out digital assets and stuff like that, which has got staying power. And I think what you're starting to see is there's an element of exposure that people want to that. Now, the second part of it is, how do people get exposure? Like you can buy Bitcoin directly, or, you can buy something that gives you something that, provides you the effects of owning it, but you don't have to own it yourself.
Right.
And that can take a whole bunch of, different, I guess, kind of packages and structuring. But effectively, most of those things end up being some kind of, security or investment vehicle that does have rules that need to be followed. And oftentimes that avenue of being able to distribute products is heavily regulated. And so to a certain degree, although there, for example, might not be a burst of people that are going in and buying Bitcoin right away, what this hopefully does is it provides the guardrails for that larger ecosystem. Right. So people can get exposure if they want it, but get exposure in ways that they're comfortable with, or they feel is properly kind of packaged for them and suitable for them. That's kind of one of the key things, right? So I think, there may be some, kind of wave that comes through just as things are starting to heat up and tension's starting to come through and there's more clarity. And again, we're still waiting for some of this stuff, right? Like, there was an article that said that, that the SEC is thinking about providing retail the ability to be able to access blue chip, kind of large market cap coins, but there's no specific names to them yet. And those are the kind of things where we're still waiting for some clarity. But at the same time, it's this idea of, if I'm a professional and there's an element of me being able to do a whole lot of different things, I can then provide a structure like an ETF or an ETP or one of these types of instruments to people who are, a little less, I guess, kind of capable of being able to do all the work themselves. And that gives them that easier adoption, right? And I think it goes back to this idea of, jobs to be done. If I just want exposure, I may want something that looks and feels like I've bought it, but doesn't have to be the same as buying it. But to do so requires certain things. And that's kind of where a lot of this stuff sets the rules for the road.
When you say institutions are buying crypto, you mean just the banks or other companies?
Yeah. So for Bullish, like what we think about are people who are corporations, right? So they formed a company. So it could be proprietary trading firms, it could be hedge funds, it could be banks. But it also is just more of these people who are professionally doing it.
Okay.
That's really kind of the group that we're targeting.
Okay. All right. So let's shift over to the Hong Kong Monetary Association, right? Authority. Sorry, the authority. They are in the process of taking tenders for someone to create a stable coin here. Is that true?
I've heard that there's like work that's being done around, effectively kind of, either a stable coin or a CBDC of some sort.
Okay.
But yeah, it's exciting to see that they're really engaged on
What
the
does
subject.
that mean for the normal person here?
Well, so it depends on which form it takes, right? To a certain degree. I think with CBDCs, there is an element of, is this just digital money, right? And I think there's an element of, what efficiencies does it create for the normal person. It might mean something, and for other people, it might not mean very much, right?
Yeah.
Because at the same time, Hong Kong, I think, has kind of been on the leading front on a number of years around kind of just digitization of money.
Yeah.
But I think, here in particular, if you're talking about all the corporations that are working here, CBDCs allow for greater amounts of, call it like cross-border efficiencies around how you use money. Yeah. And especially if it's if it's something that's, call it like a e-Hong Kong dollar or something like that.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting because an e-Hong Kong dollar is also pegged to the US dollar, right? So there's a lot of use cases that form from that. But when it comes to the average consumer, it's kind of hard, right? I mean, like Hong Kong, I feel like the only place I actually use, bills and dollars is in the taxi. And even that is kind of like starting to get people using the octopus now. But for the most part, it's already been very digitized. It just depends as to...
Is that what you're saying, though? That the stable coin will be like an octopus card?
No,
the Cha will take a stable coin to buy your Lai Cha.
I think we're still waiting to see what it looks like, right? Because I think a lot of these conversations, it's very kind of at the first inning, right? I think a lot of the CBDC context in the last, call it 2 years, has been around more of how do we think about cross-border payments? How do we think about the ability for us to be able to use, a kind of government-issued currency that allows for corporations to be more efficient, right? That's where I feel like I've heard the most amount of kind of impact or potential impact. Right. So I'm assuming that it's along those lines. Okay. But at the same time, if there's something else that all of a sudden is, hey, we can, provide, let's say in the past couple of years, there's been, kind of the payments out to Hong Kong permanent residents. on the back of the budgeting.
Yeah.
If that makes that more efficient, instead of getting on Octopus or Alipay or
Right.
it might come another way, maybe. But I think that most of the benefits come more at that kind of corporate level and corporate banking.
And then how soon do you think this is actually going to be reality, though?
Actually, that one I haven't followed the latest, so I don't really know where it's at.
This is not a 2-year thing. This is maybe a 5-year thing.
I mean, it sounds like just everything right now around this space.
Yeah.
Like the Hong Kong government is really, really interested in really moving in it. I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it's been fascinating to see, like back in October, I think it was, right?
It
Hong
was
Kong Fintech
October.
Week,
It was not that
right?
long ago. Yeah.
That was the first time that you had,
Yeah.
the finance secretary and then
Yeah.
you had the SFC and the HKMA all come up
Yeah.
on stage and say, we're going to make Hong Kong a virtual asset hub.
Right.
And it just feels like the momentum's continued. It's
Yeah.
only just continued.
And
to
they're
pick up
wearing
pace.
Bored Apes outfits too, which is also crazy. Designed by Vivian Tam, which is more and more crazy.
Which is pretty-
That's a big signal to the world what's happening here, right?
Yeah. So I mean, so again, I'm not up on the latest
Okay.
on it, and it sounds like there's a lot of traction, but
Yeah.
we're just quite excited to see how it goes from here.
I want to talk a little bit about what is happening between us, Hong Kong, and places like Singapore and Dubai. Now, I know you don't have much knowledge in the Middle East section, but you do a lot of work with Singapore. And as we know, right, being in Hong Kong or being in Singapore, there's a rivalry between the two. But I've seen like a lot of discussion now where Singaporean companies are looking to come back to Hong Kong because of this new regulations, and also Singapore is kind of like pushing against it now after they were so open to it before. What do you see between the two cities right now?
Yeah. So as you kind of alluded to, there's always been a little bit of this kind of, call it rivalry competition happening between Hong Kong and Singapore. I'd say that in the last 2-3 years, particularly in our space, Hong Kong was kind of making it quite difficult to operate, and so as a result of that, there was a lot of, call it, push factor from Hong Kong. At the same time, Singapore was like, hey, you know what? Like, come over here. We've got this, incredible, like, call it, city with all these different kind of areas of support that we can provide. And so they were welcoming it. And so to a certain degree, that push and pull dynamic just worked in Singapore's favor as that's kind of come over the last 2 years. But then that's also, when a lot of things happen in the crypto space, like a lot of the explosions, implosions of companies, and a lot of it just happened to have ties to Singapore. And I think that's caused a lot of that kind of friendly environment to kind of decelerate, and it's kind of wound down a little bit. There's a lot less movement in terms of, let's say, licenses that we've been hearing coming through, or people who are just building en masse over there. And it could be also just we're in what many people call a crypto winter at the same time. So just the overall environment's not been that particularly great. But it's kind of like the exact reverse, right? As that's kind of slowing down, we started seeing Hong Kong opening up. So it's again that same push-pull factor.
Right.
People kind of being told, to a certain degree, hey, we should look for somewhere other than Singapore to continue the expansion.
Yeah.
And then Hong Kong saying, hey, come over here, right? We're going to give you not just simply like the rules of the road, but there's a lot of reporting right now about banking, kind of counterparties being more friendly to the space. And that's kind of the necessary, we'll call it like complementary assets that are required for this ecosystem to build.
Right.
And so you could tell it's, kind of this constant back and forth. Now, with that being said, for our space, when it comes to like this more fintech side of Web3 and crypto, it's really hard to beat the kind of talent that you get from operating out of Hong Kong, given that, again, like many of the world's preeminent banks and investment banks and et cetera, brokerages, have their Asia headquarters here in Hong Kong, right? And so the right kind of, call it talent that we need to run, for example, what we're doing, like a more institutional style of, call it capital markets, fintech style space, this is a great place for us to continue building on that talent, right? And so I think that's also something where, the fact that you can now, travel freely in and out of Hong Kong, go visit, your favorite thing on the weekend, like all of those great things about Hong Kong are coming back. Yeah. And I feel like the appeal is also coming back here as well.
Do you think that, you talk to people in the market, do they feel confident about this, shift? Because it did shift before. And, I still remember China's like COVID zero. And then one day they're like, you know what? It's over. Let's just go back to normal life now, right? That's the only thing. I love how fast Asia moves, but also how fast it could just flip flop again. What is your gut instinct on this feeling like? Yeah.
So my gut feeling is that there's definitely a lot more momentum to be had here.
Okay.
I guess to a certain degree,
it's too late to slow it down. It's going.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also there's more and more signals to suggest that there's just more to keep on pushing. So like, for example, right, back in October, there was like, call it public announcements that we're going to make this virtual asset up. And everyone was like, this is great, kind of verbiage. But at the same time, we'd like to see
Let's
more
see
happen.
what it looks
right?
like, yeah.
And then all of a sudden you started seeing, okay, there's real like engagement with the community on what should these new rules look like? How should we upgrade the system in terms of the regulatory space? And that's actually shown through. And then you started having, all this conversation around banks being more friendly and supporting it. And that's also kind of, so it just feels like there's more and more signals that are building on top of the last one.
Okay.
And, for example, like June 1st, if they deliver on this idea that there's going to be clear rules, guidance around this, now you have one of the top regulators in the world saying, this is how you're going to do it. This is what's going to be defined in it. And I think if that continues to progress, then you're finding it to be like quite a lot of great momentum, right?
Yeah,
and I think that there's also an element of the broader Hong Kong story, which is, we're back in business, right?
Yeah.
Like we're talking a lot of stuff specific to our industry, but I think that's the same with the tourism industry, F&B industry here. Like there's so many different levers to what's happening in Hong Kong that everything's kind of pushing forward in that, and I think our industry benefits from that as well.
Yep. Okay, so let's shift from Hong Kong and let's go to the US, right? Where it's a completely different story, right? That's kind of why I wanted you on the podcast, is to talk about what's going on here, because when I'm in the US, it's totally different, right? It's basically shut down. I don't know if it's a political play. It is. But, what do you see, without regulation there? What about Europe? What about, I don't know, South Latin America? Like I just came back from there. Like what do you think are the markets beside us that are going forward? And do you think the US is really just dead to crypto?
Yeah, so I'd say that like until there's like clarity coming through from the top of the house over there, it's just going to be difficult for people to continue to build over there, right?
Right.
In size and
They don't know what they can do,
Yeah,
what
exactly,
they can't
right.
do. They go to jail for doing something.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you're distracted from being a builder, right? And if that's what you're really meant to do and what you're focused on. And I think what you're finding is that around the world there's two places where it's racing towards regulatory clarity. One of them is here in Hong Kong, and the other one happens to be Europe, right? There's actually this regulatory regime that was just passed that would put together something that is uniform across continents of Europe for digital assets, which is fantastic. And then at the same time, I think that there's always been a little bit of this call it application leadership that comes from emerging markets for new technologies. Right? You often talk about how if you look at Latin America, for example, right, a lot of the people that we speak to over there talk about crypto as a way to be able to enable their day-to-day business, not just simply as some speculative investment thing, right? It's like, how do I, as a textile, a business owner, able to pay people across the border for raw materials that I need when I've got, kind of strict capital controls that are just difficult for me to be able to manage.
Interesting.
And then there's elements of that which are coming through. And at the same time, it's kind of interesting to see how, there's a push from emerging markets on adopting this stuff because it's solving real use cases. And then, for a lot of these other places, like Hong Kong and Europe, the regulatory regime is coming through with clarity to push for it. So again, this push and pull factor, right?
So
where there's a little bit of this kind of hesitation, kind of the brakes are kind of pumping over there in the US. You're starting to see other parts of the world that are saying, hey, we have a real need for this stuff. And
can America afford to pump the brakes though? Because we're talking Europe now, which I didn't know that, because they seem a little bit behind. But if you're saying they're getting their act together, Hong Kong and other parts of Asia and the Middle East are getting their act together, how can America be slowing down in this thing if everybody else is speeding up?
I don't really know exactly how America kind of ended up in the state that it is today on this particular subject. It's something where it just feels like, we were hoping for, I guess kind of a race towards that clarity. But it just seems like as, there's been this kind of pause and hesitation that we're starting to see greater and greater amounts of movement elsewhere, right? And I think part of it is also there's a lot of people that are building in this space and they're looking for ways to continue pushing forward, right? Like I'm particularly excited about this idea that blockchain technology and innovation has already kind of reached this self-sustaining momentum. And to a certain degree, the people that are driving it need an environment that will allow them to continue pushing forward in that space. And it happens to be somewhere else other than the States. I think there's parts of the States where people are still pushing for that. And I think that's incredible for the industry. But, when you've got a really, really great environment, I think it really helps.
Yeah, right. Where do you see, at least Hong Kong, since you're based here, the next 5 years? Where do you see it, or where do you want to see it?
Yeah, I'd love to see kind of Hong Kong be this like hub of, just kind of building interesting technology, finding real use cases. I think I really hope that Hong Kong continues to push for where it's going right now.
Yeah.
Like I kind of feel like, back in, pre-COVID times, there was like this really great kind of, call it, I guess kind of like gravity towards Hong Kong in terms of, if you're into being like an entrepreneur, if you're really into the hustle, if you're really wanting to like accelerate kind of, I guess, productivity, Hong Kong's where you want to be. And I feel like it's kind of returning. I kind of hope that in 5 years' time, you start to see that again, kind of like buzzing and starting to feel like, we're kind of carrying off where we last left off, right?
Yeah, right. I think it's going to be even bigger than ever before. That's for sure. You've been doing, we've been crisscrossing our paths over different events, conferences, right? I want to talk a little bit about the vibe check of what we see, because most of the time we're behind a screen all the time, and you're talking just internally to your team. But the last couple of weeks, last month or so, there's been so much Web3 conferences here in Hong Kong, and you've spoken at a couple of them and you've attended them. What is your vibe check on some of these things that you've been here in Hong Kong seeing, like hearing, and just your observations that you want to share?
Yeah, so I'd say that, about a month ago, there was kind of the start again of like many different conferences. I'd say that, the first one that came through in town, it felt like a lot of people were coming in from around the regions just to see, is this traction real? We're hearing about all this stuff.
Right.
But I think, last month there was this huge conference here in Wan Chai, and it was like, reportedly 10,000 people were in town for this thing.
Yeah, the Hashkey event, right?
That's right. Yeah. So it was incredible to see that happening. Yeah. And I mean, again, it's kind of this buzz where, I think it was like the week after I was in Austin, Texas in Consensus, which is another big conference, like global tier 1 for crypto and blockchain. And it certainly felt like the excitement that was there last year kind of waned a little bit this year in terms of the attendance. Yeah. But it felt like that same excitement I felt here in Hong Kong, right? And so it's kind of this shift that's happened. A lot of what we're describing at a very macro level, you can kind of sense it in these conferences as well. I mean, like, for example, I had somebody from my team attend, the summit over in Rio, and she was telling me that it was just like fantastic. Like there was so much energy, so much buzzing, and it goes back to a lot of the themes that we're just talking about.
In the bear market too, even.
Yeah,
right? Why
exactly.
are people so excited? That's what I want to know.
It's just like I think people are like resilient, right?
Yeah, they are.
And to a certain degree, I feel I think people have recognized that if you survive this particular bear market this winter, you're building to be profitable, to actually provide use cases that people are willing to pay money for, like actual real innovation, then you're going to be in a really strong position for that next up run. And I think people are excited that, at some point in time, we start exiting out of this bear market, and you'd love to be a part of like the people operating in strength when you're in that next bull market. So I think a lot of people are excited because they've survived. They found something that they think is really, really interesting to work on, and they're dedicated to it. And I think we're starting to see more and more of that come through.
Yeah. We're recording this, I think, still Q2. What does the rest of the year look like for you? Traveling a lot? Are you looking at new markets that you think are going to be hot over the next year? Yeah.
So for us, we're going to be, continuing down, I guess, the conference season track. So, we're going to be at a couple of big conferences later on this year, whether that's in Europe or here in Hong Kong, Singapore. There's going to be a big one happening.
2049.
That's right, in September. And I think that there's a lot of the continuation for us. Like Asia and Europe are our two largest kind of focus points, and Latin America is a place where we're starting to think about a little bit more. I might make my way down there at some point this year, just to see what that looks like.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm excited to actually see what is coming in the calendar for Hong Kong. I feel like the biggest conferences for Hong Kong haven't even showed up yet because it's only been very recent. That
we're looking at, I think the next big one will be November, right? Will be the Hong Kong FinTech Week. They're going to put a lot of emphasis on the digital assets for that, right? Because that's where that all happened last year, right? So it'll be like a pulse check 1 year later to see what it looks like. And I think because of what was said and what you just said and how it's moved so much, I think a lot of people will be coming in for that to learn more about what's happening here. And I know there are a lot of side events going on. That's one thing I love about Web3 stuff is the side events. Everybody puts on their own things. Now, just quickly go back to, because you touched on so many things just now, I just want to kind of back up on it. So the Web3 festival that happened here, but Hashkey put on, I would say 90% were from the mainland. I wouldn't say they were, maybe 10% were Hong Kong and then everybody else. I know I had people from Vancouver fly over as well because they heard about it. But it's funny because 2 months ago, a lot of people from China DMing me and saying, hey, have you heard of this show? I'm like, no, never heard it before. They didn't really market it here. It was mostly for mainland to come down. But I wanted to attend it because I wanted to see who these people were. Who is the Chinese people who are willing to come out here and basically tell everybody we use VPN to buy this stuff, right? Because a lot of NFT collectors were there. A lot of Bored Ape holders were in town. And I was like, wow, there's a lot more than you think. And probably if you were able to actually see where the wallets came from. You'd be probably surprised. A lot of this NFT trading is done on this side of the world, right? Not actually where the Bored Apes were created. Or think from that side of it. Do you get that kind of feel?
I mean,
from that?
it was pretty crazy because I had a very similar experience to you in the sense that, I heard about this thing. I didn't know what to expect. And leading up to the actual event, just more buzz started coming through. But again, I didn't see anything. I saw just like, a very simple website and all of a sudden you show up and there's like 10,000 people. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't speak Mandarin. So, I couldn't understand what something like 70-80% of the people there were speaking Mandarin. And so to me, it was just really interesting to see the dynamics of it. Again, I'm still kind of trying to work out who exactly was there. Right. I couldn't really converse, and I was kind of upset that I didn't, pay attention to my Chinese lessons when I was a kid. Same. But but it was exciting to see that return of people traveling to Hong Kong, talking about this stuff.
Definitely. Well, I went to a lot of these side events as well, these kind of parties and stuff held by other kind of crypto companies, and the Chinese people that show up for that, they spoke English. So I was just grilling them on what they were doing and what they were buying. And it's fascinating, right? So I don't have to actually go in there and kind of go to their conferences. They're bringing in people here, which I think is fantastic. So hopefully they do it again next year. They had a couple of English panels, but hopefully they'll have a more international track because more people will definitely want to come in and start to communicate. Because I think that cross-border international audience is so important to come to Hong Kong. Right, most people don't even need a visa to come here; they just pop in and do it. Right, we still got to do all these things to go to China, and I don't think they really want us there just yet. These foreigners yet. So just come to Hong Kong as kind of the hub and meet everybody here. I think it's the best thing possible. I was at Consensus last year in Austin. They held it, I think, later in the year. It was super hot. It was crazy hot there. So they moved it up this year. That's great. And you said the vibe was pretty good there, even though the market's down. Because last year was the market was okay, I think, right? I don't think Terra Luna was still around, wasn't it?
I think it just happened.
Yeah,
right.
So everything started to collapse at that point because I know by the time we got to Toronto, with a lot of people were bailing out of the conversation because they want to be responsible to answer these questions that were so serious. It just seemed to like slide so bad. But I guess there's enough people still bullish on the market that they're still there.
Well, so for me, the biggest thing that I noticed was that there were fewer people, right? Like last year, it felt like most of my meetings were beside a potted plant in a hall because there was just no space anywhere, right? But this time around, it felt like there were a lot fewer people. But every person that I met there seemed to be working or part of a startup or something related to the space, which is also pretty exciting because it's like people who've dedicated their careers to be a part of this industry, and I felt like that was quite, positive in terms of, the feeling of it. People recognize this as a tough environment, but you're there because you believe in this stuff. You believe in building the space better, and that's why you're there. And to me, that was quite, energizing.
Yeah, great. All right, Michael, thanks for your time today. I asked you one final question. I asked everybody, what are you most super excited about?
Well, I'm super excited that, Hong Kong is back. I'm super excited people are visiting again. I'm super excited that the fact that, this industry that we're a part of, it's starting to just thrive again as like we're starting to pour more, I guess, kind of energy and excitement into it together with just the clarity that we're seeing in the environment. So to me, like you could say I'm still very, very bullish about what's happening here in Hong Kong and what we're doing.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Michael.
Cool. Thanks, Casey.
You've been experiencing Super Excited with Casey Lau. Download Super Excited on your favorite podcast app now.